My mother slid the documents across the kitchen table like she was passing me a grocery list. I was standing near the window, still in my coat from work. The late afternoon light came through the blinds in thin stripes across the floor of the house I had been paying for. The house where I learned to walk, where I had come home to when my life fell apart at 24, where I had quietly rebuilt everything in the years since. My mother's name was Carmen. My brother's name was Louis. And the papers on that table said the house now belonged to Louis, effective 3 weeks ago, while I was still sending monthly payments to the account Carmen had set up years back. Louis was leaning against the refrigerator. He did not look at me directly. He had the specific expression of a man who knows something is wrong and has decided not to think about it too carefully. It made sense, my mother said. He needs stability right now. I picked up the papers. I read them slowly. My hands were steady, which surprised me. The transfer had been finalized on a Tuesday. I had sent a payment that Thursday. I set the papers back down on the table. My mother talked for several minutes after that. She used words like practical and long-term and family, and she talked about Louis and the pressures he was under and how sometimes the right thing is not the obvious thing and how she hoped I would understand in time. I stood there and listened. "You've always been independent," she said. "Louis needs a foundation. You don't need this the way he does." The words were not new. I had heard versions of them my entire life. Nadia is fine. Nadia manages. Nadia doesn't need things given to her because Nadia will figure it out. 29 years of being the capable one, which is another way of saying 29 years of being the one who could be passed over without anyone feeling guilty about it. "What's your plan for it?" I asked Louis directly. He shifted his weight. "I'm thinking about renovating. Updating the kitchen, the bathrooms. Make it modern. And after the renovation?" He shrugged in the specific way that is not really a shrug. "We'll see," he said. My mother looked at the table. I understood then that we were not talking about renovation. We were talking about Louis's debts, which had circulated in the family for 2 years without anyone naming them directly. I picked up my bag. I did not argue. I know this surprised them both, because I saw it. My mother's shoulders had been raised slightly since I walked in, braced for an argument. Louis had positioned himself near the doorway. They were ready for something I did not give them. I said I needed to think, and I walked out. The evening air outside was cold. It was November, the kind of early November where the warmth of October is entirely gone and winter has not yet decided to arrive fully. The trees on the street had dropped most of their leaves and the sidewalk was quiet in the way suburban sidewalks are quiet at dusk. I stood by my car for a moment. Then I opened my bag and reached past my wallet and my work keys to the back corner where I had kept a worn white envelope for the past 4 years. I had moved it from my apartment drawer to my bag after my grandfather passed. I had moved it without understanding quite why. I held the envelope in both hands. I did not open it there. I just held it and breathed. Then I got in the car and drove home. My grandfather's name was Eduardo, and he had built the house on Calle Mayra with his own hands in 1971. Not metaphorically. He had actually built it. He had spent 8 months laying the foundation and framing the walls with his brother and 2 neighbors. He believed a home was the most honest thing a person could leave behind. Not money. Not jewelry. A place. When he died 4 years ago, he left the house to my mother with a document he had drawn up with a property attorney in 1998, when I was 6 years old and Louis was 4. I had been the one who went through his desk after the funeral. My mother was not in a condition to do it, and Louis lived 4 hours away. I found the original deed inside a manila folder labeled in my grandfather's handwriting, for the house. Keep safe. I had kept it. I spread it on my kitchen table that night and read it slowly. 2 pages. Specific language. My grandfather had been a practical man. On the bottom of the second page, there was a clause I had read before but had not, until that moment, fully understood the weight of. Her name was Soline Patel and she had been a property attorney for 14 years. I found her through a colleague at work who had used her for a boundary dispute the previous year and described her as someone who does not waste your time with things she cannot help you with. I called on a Wednesday morning. I brought the original deed, 12 months of bank transfer records, and a printed timeline I had made the night before. Soline Patel was small and precise, and she read everything I gave her without speaking for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on her office wall. When she looked up, she said, "Where did you get this?" "My grandfather's desk," I said. 4 years ago. "Has anyone else seen it?" "Not that I know of." She nodded slowly. She turned back to the deed and read the second page again. "The transfer your mother executed," she said, "went through a standard title company process. But this document predates and technically supersedes the recorded title by virtue of its conditions." Meaning the transfer may not be fully valid, she said. "Not without meeting these requirements first." She tapped the page. "Which, from what you've shown me, did not happen." The first clause was about acknowledgment. Soline read it to me clearly and then explained it in plain language, which I appreciated. The original deed stated that any transfer of ownership of the property at Calle Myra required the written acknowledgement of all named beneficiaries of the estate. My grandfather had listed 3, my mother Carmen, and her 2 children. Me and Louis. I had not been notified. I had not been consulted. I had not signed anything. That alone, Soline said, creates a strong basis for challenging the transfer. "Is that enough to stop it?" I asked. "It is enough to put it under serious legal review." She paused. "But there is a second clause." She turned the page and slid it toward me. I had read this section before, but I had not understood exactly what it meant until she explained it. The language was from 1998, which Soline said was still applicable because the deed had never been formally amended. The second clause was tied to what my grandfather called continued stewardship. It was the kind of language that sounds simple until you understand what it actually requires. I leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what stewardship means in this context," I said. Stewardship, in my grandfather's deed, meant 2 things. The first was residency. The property was intended to remain with whoever had maintained a primary or significant residential presence there for the longest continuous period following Eduardo's death. The second was financial contribution. The deed specified that whoever had been making consistent documented payments toward the property's maintenance, mortgage, or upkeep for a period of not less than 2 years had established what the document called a material interest in the home. Soline looked at me over the papers. "Have you been living there?" "I lived there for 3 years after my grandfather died," I said. "I moved to my own apartment 18 months ago." "And the payments?" I slid the bank records across. 4 years of monthly transfers, I said. "My mother told me it was going toward the mortgage and property taxes." Soline studied the records for a long time. Then she set them down. She was quiet a moment. "Ms. Vega," she said, "based on what you have shown me, you are the only party who meets both stewardship conditions in this deed." She folded her hands. "Your brother does not appear to meet either of them. What do we do next?" I said. "I went back to the house on a Saturday morning. I told myself it was to pick up a box of my grandfather's books. But I also needed to see the house with what I now knew sitting behind my eyes. Louis was there. He had a measuring tape and a notebook, and he was moving between rooms with the focused energy of someone who has already decided what he is doing and is only working out the details. My mother was in the kitchen. She made coffee without asking if I wanted any, which was her way of trying to pretend the previous Tuesday had not happened. I accepted the coffee. I walked through the living room slowly. There were marks on the doorframe where my grandfather had recorded our heights. Louis's went up to 12. Mine went up to 15. I noticed a folded brochure on the kitchen counter. A general contractor's name and logo. I picked it up and looked at it and set it back down. "They are coming Monday," my mother said, watching me. "First consult." I looked at Louis. He was in the hallway doorway with his tape measure. "You may want to hold off on that," I said. Louis looked up from his notebook. "Why?" I set down my coffee mug. I had been thinking about how to say this since Thursday. I had practiced several versions and they had all sounded either too aggressive or not serious enough. In the end, I decided the plain version was best. "Because there may be a legal issue with the transfer," I said. I would not want you to spend money on contractors before that gets sorted out. My mother put down her coffee spoon. What legal issue? The paperwork was done by a title company. I know, I said. But the title company may not have had access to all the relevant documents when they processed the transfer. Louis stared at me. What documents? Grandfather's original deed, I said. There was a silence. That old thing, my mother said. That was just his personal record. It is not legally binding. I did not argue with that. I am just suggesting you pause the contractors until you have confirmed everything is in order, I said. For your own protection. I finished the coffee and picked up the box of books. You might want to double-check the legality of that transfer, I said. Then I walked out. Louis texted me that evening. The text said, "Stop trying to cause problems. The transfer was done legally and properly. We have the paperwork." I did not respond immediately. I made dinner and ate it at my kitchen table and read for an hour. Then I responded with 3 words, "I know you do." He did not text back. At 9:10 that same evening, Soline Patel sent me an email. It was brief and professional and said that she had reviewed the deed further, consulted with a colleague who specialized in historical property documents, and was prepared to file a formal review request with the County Property Records Office the following morning. She wanted my written confirmation to proceed. I confirmed at 9:22. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I was afraid of what was coming, but because of a feeling I had no good word for, the feeling of doing something that cannot be undone. I thought about my grandfather's handwriting. For the house. Keep safe. I thought about the bank transfer I had sent the week the deed was signed over to Louis. I thought about my mother's voice saying Nadia doesn't need things the way Louis does. In the morning I got up and went to work. The contractor did not come on Monday. Louis called me at 11:15. His voice had a different quality than the text from Saturday. The confidence was still there, but it was sitting on top of something less steady. The contractor cancelled, he said. He said something about a title dispute flag. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Did you do something? I asked my attorney to file a formal review of the property transfer with the county office, I said. It is a standard process when there is a question about deed conditions. You have an attorney? Yes. There was a pause. Nadia, this is our family home. I know that, I said. That is why I am being careful about it. He hung up. My mother called 20 minutes later. Her voice was different from Louis's. Where he was tight and controlled, she was something closer to frightened. Frightened of what might be true. Is this real? She said. Is there actually a problem? There may be, I said. I am waiting for the formal review to confirm. Why did you not come to us first? I thought about the Tuesday she had slid those papers across the table without a word to me. I am asking the same question, I said. I spent the following week gathering everything. Bank statements going back 4 years. The setup email from when my mother had given me the account number, which said clearly, this is for the house, mortgage and taxes. Receipts for repairs I had paid directly, a new water heater in the 2nd year, a fence replacement, 2 plumber visits. A contractor invoice from when the roof needed patching, which I had handled because Louis was in the middle of moving and my mother said she did not have the cash that month. I also found an email from 3 years ago where my mother had asked me to increase my monthly payment for a rate adjustment. I had never reduced it back. I printed everything and organized it by date. 47 pages. Soline looked through it on Thursday afternoon. She was quiet in the same way she had been quiet before. The particular quiet of a lawyer who is building a picture. These are not informal family contributions, she said finally. These are structured, consistent, documented payments toward property maintenance and financing over years. She looked up. The way this is structured, these could constitute a financial interest under the deed stewardship clause. This is not a thin case, Ms. Vega, she said. This is actually quite strong. My mother called on a Friday morning and asked me to come to the house. I went. I was not looking forward to it, but I went because I believed that whatever was going to happen needed to happen in person. She was alone when I arrived. Lewis's car was not in the driveway. She had made tea, which in our family was a gesture of wanting things to be civil. We sat at the kitchen table. "You are trying to take the house back," she said. Her voice was not accusing exactly. It was more like she was stating a thing she needed confirmed. "I am trying to make sure the transfer was done correctly," I said. "That is the same thing." "It is not," I said. "If the transfer was valid, my challenge fails and Lewis keeps the house. If it was not, the property reverts until the conditions are met properly." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I did what I thought was right for this family." "I know," I said. "But you did it without telling me. You transferred this house without saying a single word to me." She looked down at the table. "I never gave this house away," I said. "So I cannot take it back." The letter arrived at my mother's house on a Tuesday. She called me as soon as she opened it, which I took as a sign that something in her had shifted since Friday. The previous version of my mother would have called Lewis first. "There is a letter from a law office," she said. "It says the transfer is under investigation." "That is from Soline Patel's firm," I said. "That is the formal review I mentioned." She read me the relevant section. The letter stated that the recent ownership transfer of the property at Calle Myra was under review by the County Property Records Office at the request of an interested party. It further stated that any structural renovation, sale, or use of the property as collateral during the review period could result in legal liability for the current named owner. There was a silence on the line. "Collateral," my mother said quietly. "Yes," I said. "Lewis did not tell me that part." I waited. "He has been talking to a lender," she said. "About using the house." I had suspected this but not confirmed it. Hearing her say it settled something. "The letter should pause that conversation," I said. "Which is why I asked Soline to send it now." Word moved through the family the way it always does. Quietly and faster than anyone wanted. My Aunt Petra called me on a Wednesday evening. She was my grandfather's younger sister, 81 years old, with the authority of someone who was present when everything being disputed was first decided. "Your cousin told me there is trouble about the house," she said. I explained it carefully. All of it, the transfer, the deed, the clauses, the payments, the legal review. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Eduardo told me about that deed," she said. "When he had it drawn up. I was there." "What did he say?" "He said he did not want the house to go to whoever was born first or whoever asked loudest. He said it should go to whoever proved they loved it by taking care of it." She paused. "He was very clear about that. He said, the house belongs to the one who keeps the house." I held the phone and looked at the wall of my apartment. "Did my mother know that?" I asked. Petra was quiet for a moment longer than felt comfortable. "Carmen was there," she said. "When Eduardo explained it. She heard the same thing I heard. I asked my mother directly on Saturday. I drove to the house and she was there and I sat across from her at the kitchen table again and I asked her if she had known about my grandfather's intentions for the house when she arranged the transfer to Lewis. She held her mug for a long time without drinking from it. "I knew he had ideas," she said. "He talked about the house belonging to whoever took care of it. But he said that years before he died. People say things. He put it in the deed," I said. "I did not think that kind of thing held up legally," she said. "Did you ask a lawyer?" She did not answer. "Mom," I said. "Did you know about the clause?" She set the mug down. She looked out the window at the garden my grandfather had kept and my mother had mostly let grow wild since he died. "I knew there was something in the original document," she said. "I thought it was just his personal wishes. I did not think it could block a transfer. Why did you not ask me?" She looked at me finally. "Because I knew what you would say." She was right about that. Lewis and I had not spoken since the phone call about the contractor. He came to the house on Sunday while I was there with my mother. He walked in and saw me and for a moment he just stood in the doorway of the kitchen with his car keys still in his hand. My mother said she would make more tea. That was her method of removing herself from rooms without technically leaving. Lewis sat down across from me. "Tell me what you actually want," he said. Not aggressive. More tired. I want to understand the full situation first, I said. How much do you owe? He looked at his keys. Enough. Is the lender already involved? He nodded once. They were going to use the property as collateral to consolidate the debt. Clean start. How much time do you have before the pressure becomes serious? 3 months, maybe 4. He looked up. The house was the solution. I had been angry at Louis for most of the past 2 weeks. Sitting in our grandfather's kitchen, I found the anger had gone somewhere quieter. He had not invented his debt to hurt me. He had found himself in a corner. My mother had handed him what looked like a door. It was not hers to hand. I called Soline on Monday morning. I need to understand the full exposure, I said. If the transfer stands and Louis uses the house as collateral, what happens if he cannot service that debt? Soline was direct, as she always was. She said that if the house had been used as collateral for a loan and Louis defaulted, the lender could move to foreclose. The house would effectively be lost, not to Louis, not to my mother, not to me, but to a financial institution that had no connection to my grandfather or the 40 years of history inside those walls. Has the property already been used as collateral? I asked. That is what we are trying to determine, she said. The freeze request will flag any active liens or encumbrances. We should know within 72 hours. And if there is already a lien, then the situation is more urgent than we thought, she said. We would need to move quickly. I hung up and sat at my desk. I thought about my grandfather and the folder in his desk drawer. For the house. Keep safe. I had kept it safe for 4 years without fully knowing why. Now I knew why. The freeze came through on Wednesday. Soline called me at 2 in the afternoon. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. Furthermore, he said, the room should be aware that the person making these claims was herself flagged internally for approving early versions of these same transactions. He unfolded the document. I have a signed authorization form. The signature is Lyra Ashford's. He placed it on the nearest table and stepped back. The room turned toward me. I smiled. I recognized the document from across the room. Not because I had seen that specific printout before. Because I had created the original file it was printed from, deliberately altered 3 fields inside it, and left it somewhere it would be found. The document was a test. I had built it 6 weeks ago, after Ned's first confirmation that a second party was involved. I understood that whoever that party was would eventually try to redirect blame toward me. The form looked authentic. The signature looked real. But 3 fields inside it were wrong in a way that only someone who had modified the original would have introduced. I stepped forward. May I see that document? I said. Damien Holt held it out with the confidence of a man who believes he holds a weapon. I took it and looked at it for 5 seconds. This document has been altered, I said. The original file was created and stored on a Foundation server 6 weeks ago. These 3 fields were changed after the file was accessed. I turned to the room. I know they were changed after my disowning because the original unaltered version was submitted to a regulatory body 4 weeks ago. Before anyone had reason to doctor it. The timestamps do not match. The access logs for the Foundation's document server, I said, show that this file was opened 4 days after I was publicly disowned. Not before. Not during my time on the board. 4 days after. I set the document on the nearest table. If I had authorized those transactions, I said, there would be no reason to alter the record afterward. Records are altered when the original does not say what someone needs it to say. Damien Holt was still standing. His composure was holding, but it had become the kind that is visible as effort rather than ease. You could have altered those logs yourself, he said. I could have, I said. Which is why I did not rely on the logs alone. I nodded to Priya. The screens changed. A comparison document appeared. Left side, the original file with its correct fields, time-stamped and digitally certified by a third-party service 4 weeks ago. Right side, Damien Holt's version, with the 3 modified fields highlighted in red. The certification date on the left was 2 weeks before my disowning. The modification date on the right was 4 days after. The audience could read. Several leaned forward. Several others sat back in the particular way of people who have just understood something they cannot unfeel. My father had not spoken in 11 minutes. I had been counting. He was still standing at the podium but had stopped holding the microphone. He was watching the room with the detachment of someone who has not yet fully accepted that the distance is an illusion. Then he stepped forward and picked up the microphone again. "I cut Lyra off to protect the foundation," he said. The room waited. There were internal concerns. A potential review. Having a family member involved in any disputed transactions, even tangentially, created a liability I could not afford. He said it with the measured weight of a man delivering an uncomfortable but necessary truth. The room shifted slightly. It was a very well-constructed statement, and I could feel it working on people who did not yet know the rest. "You cut me off," I said, 2 days before a regulatory inquiry notice was officially filed with the foundation. "Not to protect the foundation. To create distance between yourself and what was about to happen. A disowned daughter cannot be compelled to testify on behalf of her father's organization. The legal separation you created that night was not about protecting me or the foundation." I looked at him directly. "It was about protecting yourself from what I already knew." I took out the envelope. It was a simple white envelope. Inside was a 14-page document that I placed on the nearest table without unfolding, because the audience did not need to read it. They only needed to know it existed. "For weeks ago," I said, "a formal regulatory inquiry was initiated into the financial practices of the Ashford Foundation. The inquiry is focused on the subaccounts Ned described, the disbursement gap on those screens, and the identity of the second authorized signatory on the unlisted reserve fund." I paused. "I know about the inquiry because I am one of the parties who submitted documentation to the investigators. Voluntarily. In writing. With a full record of what I had found." The room was absolutely still. The investigators are thorough and independent. Their process does not require a room full of witnesses. It only requires documents. And documents, unlike speeches, do not care about the size of the audience. I looked at my father. I could see, in the particular stillness that had come over him, the exact moment he understood that the inquiry was not something he could manage around. It was already underway. It had been underway for 4 weeks. The room fractured the way rooms do when the ground beneath them has shifted. Tables nearest the exit began to show the subtle choreography of people preparing to leave. A man in a grey suit made a phone call with his back turned. 2 of my father's most visible public supporters were speaking to each other in the careful voices of people revising a position. Damien Holt had sat back down. He was looking at his phone. My father stood at the podium without moving. One of the foundation's largest donors stood and said my name. "Lyra. Are you formally accusing your father of misconduct tonight?" "No," I said. "This is not a legal proceeding." "Then what is it?" "It is a conversation that should have happened privately," I said. "And that could not, because I was removed from any forum where it could take place." A woman I did not know asked, "What do you want the foundation to do?" I had thought about that question for weeks. I had drafted answers in margins at 2 in the morning when the apartment was quiet. "I want the foundation to survive," I said. "I want it to serve the communities it was built for. What I do next depends on whether that is still possible." I could have demanded his resignation from the podium. I could have projected the regulatory filing number on the screen, named the investigators, laid out every document, every transfer, every date and account reference in sequence until nothing was left to dispute. I had the material to do all of it. I did not. Lewis received a formal notice from the lender that the property could not be used as collateral. He was on his own with the debt. He had known that was coming for 3 weeks by then and had started working with a financial counselor. My mother sat with me in the kitchen on the afternoon the paperwork was finalized. She did not say much. She held her mug and looked at the window and the garden she had let grow untended. "I made it worse," she said. "You made a mistake," I said. "That is different." I went to the house alone on a Saturday morning in January. My mother was visiting Petra. Louis was in the city. I had a key, which I had always had, and I let myself in and stood in the hallway in the cold quiet. It was the same house. The doorframe marks were still there. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee my grandfather had made every morning for 40 years. The window over the sink let in the same morning light it always had. I walked to the back bedroom where I had lived for 3 years after his death. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the envelope in my hands, the original deed, the thing I had carried in my bag for 4 years without knowing if I would ever need it. I thought about what the house was. It was not a victory. It was proof that care is not invisible even when people treat it that way. Proof that what you build quietly, over years, belongs to you. My grandfather had known that and written it down because he knew the people who came after him might forget. I had not forgotten. I put the deed in the envelope and went to make coffee.